What if I told you that humanity once came close to the knowledge of the gods? What if I said that the cures for diseases, precise maps of the stars, perhaps even the secrets of lost civilizations, were all kept inside a single building? And what if I told you that this knowledge wasn't lost in war, wasn't destroyed by accident, wasn't simply burned away? It was destroyed out of fear. Someone believed that this much knowledge was too dangerous for humanity. And now there is one question left. If the Library of Alexandria had survived, what kind of world would we be living in today? In 323 BC, Alexander of Macedon died, and his empire began to fracture. But one city was only just being born: Alexandria. This city was not merely a port, it was the most strategic gateway of the Mediterranean. Trade passed through here, power gathered here, and most importantly, ideas. After Alexander's death, the dynasty that came to rule Egypt, the Ptolemies, understood something crucial. An empire can be built with the sword, but it is sustained by knowledge. And for that reason, in the early 3rd century BC, an ambitious project began in Alexandria, a center that would collect writings from all corners of the world and gather scholars in one place. This center was not just a library. It was part of a vast scientific complex called the Mauseon, a place where scholars lived, debated, and wrote. A true city of the mind. The Ptolemies' goal was clear. Everything written on earth must be here. According to some sources, scholars arriving from Athens also played a role in shaping this vision. The library's structure was gradually expanded and systematized. Most importantly, scholars who came here were not treated as visitors. They lived here. Their daily needs were taken care of so they could focus on one thing only: research. Every day, new ships arrived at the port of Alexandria. New languages, new scripts, new stories. And with every ship, the world grew larger inside the library. And so, a city was not built to be famous for trade, but to become the memory of the world. The Library of Alexandria was not an ordinary building. It was the world's first truly systematic center of science. Everything here functioned by rules. First, the system of collecting books. Every ship entering the harbor of Alexandria was inspected. If a vessel carried written texts, books, or papyrus scrolls, they were taken to the library. The originals were kept. Exact copies were returned to the owners. These copies were marked with a special note: ship copy. In this way, the library did not merely collect knowledge, it preserved the most reliable sources. Then the scribes and scholars began their work. Papyrus scrolls were cleaned, restored, and classified. History, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, poetry. This was not random accumulation. For the first time in history, knowledge was systematically organized. The scholars working in the library were paid salaries. Their living expenses were covered by the state. They did not worry about family survival or trade. They had only one task: to read, to think, and to write. There were debates here, there were disagreements, errors were found, and texts were rewritten. In the Library of Alexandria, knowledge was not sacred, it was tested. And perhaps that was what made it dangerous. Because the greatest lesson taught here was this: no idea is untouchable. Behind the doors of the Library of Alexandria, there were not just books, there was the entire world. Historians estimate that between 400,000 and 1 million papyrus scrolls were stored there. For the ancient world, this number was almost unimaginable. These scrolls did not belong only to the Greek world. There were translations from Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, India, and even China. Humanity's earliest maps were gathered here. Sailors' logs, descriptions of lost lands, the names of unknown islands. There were medical texts here, descriptions of the human body, causes of diseases, methods of healing with plants. There was mathematics and astronomy, the movement of the stars, the cycles of the planets, the measurements of the earth itself. It was here that Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the earth with astonishing accuracy. It was here that another scholar, Aristarchus, proposed that the sun stood at the center of the cosmos, 1,700 years before Copernicus. There was philosophy and poetry, lost works of Homer, the thoughts of Socrates known only by name, ideas we may never read again. And this was the most frightening part. The knowledge there was not what led us to the present. It was knowledge that could have led us to a different future. But that future never left those walls. Knowledge asks questions. Knowledge creates doubt. Knowledge forces people to think. The knowledge gathered in the Library of Alexandria did not tell people to believe. It told them to test. And that has always been dangerous. In the ancient world, power was tied to gods, kings, and sacred stories. But in the library, scholars looked at the skies and asked, what if the universe is different from what we were taught? They explained diseases not as punishment, but as cause and effect. They measured the earth. They confronted myths with facts. And that frightened those in power, because a person who asks questions is not a person who obeys. The library did not punish differences of thought. It encouraged them. No text was considered untouchable. Even the most ancient knowledge was questioned and tested again. And this revealed a simple truth. When power loses control over knowledge, fear begins. The Library of Alexandria was dangerous not because of its walls, but because of its ideas. And sometimes, to kill an idea, you don't need an army. Silence is enough. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria is one of the greatest mysteries in history, because there was no single hand that burned it. The most famous version begins like this. 48 BC, Julius Caesar is trapped in Alexandria. He orders the harbor to be set on fire. The flames spread from the ships to the shore. Some historians say this fire destroyed part of the library, but not all of it, because the library continued to exist afterward. Then another era arrives. 391 AD, Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. Temples labeled as pagan are destroyed. The Serapeum, a building that housed a branch of the library, is demolished. Many ancient texts disappear here, but the story does not end there. In the 7th century, Arab armies capture Alexandria. Some sources written centuries later claim that the books were burned during this period. However, modern historians treat this version with caution. Today, the accepted truth is this: the Library of Alexandria was not destroyed in a single night. Over centuries, through war, fanaticism, neglect, and fear, it was destroyed piece by piece. And perhaps the greatest force that destroyed it was not fire, but human fear. No one knows the answer to this question for certain, because what was lost in the Library of Alexandria was not just books, it was possibility. Perhaps there were texts that explained the true causes of diseases, knowledge that understood the human body more deeply, ideas we would rediscover thousands of years later. Perhaps complete maps of the stars were stored there, the shape and size of the earth, the structure of the universe, knowledge that would still amaze us even today. Perhaps the history of lost civilizations was there, facts about Atlantis, memories of cities swallowed by the sea, truths we now dismiss as legends, and the greatest loss was not technology, it was time. If that knowledge had survived, humanity might have experienced the scientific revolution 1,000 years earlier. Diseases might have been defeated sooner. The map of the world might have been completed earlier. Perhaps today we would be living in a completely different stage of history. But history chose a different path. And today we are left with only one question: how far can we move forward without knowing what we have lost? The Library of Alexandria burned, but its question still remains. When knowledge is destroyed, it's not the past that's lost, it's the future.